But when you ask companies, so what problem are you trying to solve? Very often, they don't really understand the problem fully. And one thing that we are trying to bring across to participants of our program is that unique problems need unique solutions. So as an example, when I was designing Tomorrow, we had a choice of taking transactional data and using that transactional data to improve banking experience, or we could take deals, merchant offers, and make those offers available to customers. So without understanding what is the problem you're trying to fix and what problem is more valuable, more desirable, it's not possible to come up with a solution. And often when you develop a solution in the vacuum of the problem, you often find that you have to write off the solution. And most people don't realize the extent to which you need to customize something that's fit for purpose. So if it's not customized for that, if it's been customized with some other, perhaps more generic use in mind, you may not be able to use the solution that you have invested in. And that's part of R&D, right? R&D has a high failure rate, and you often have to change what you're doing. And hence, back to your question about the success rates, a lot of this is written off.
So when it came to that example, for example, transactional data or sort of heat map of deals, how did you decide which one to go with?
Well, we looked at all the different dimensions, right? From a customer perspective, what was more valuable? We looked at from a business model perspective, what was more aligned with the business model we wanted. And of course, once you get those two elements in sync, then you can begin to understand the capabilities you need, as I mentioned. So for us, I think the decision was made because we generate tons as banks, right? We generate tons of transactional data. And if you think about it, we don't do much with that transactional data today. We keep it for a number of years as required by regulators. It's mostly used to generate statements and mostly used when you turn up at the bank, maybe years later to say that you didn't make this transaction. We can then pull that out and verify whether you did or not. But there's a very simple example of how you can really put some of these data into action, right? Today, if a transaction fails, and usually a transaction fails because you've got a number of accounts. One of those accounts is probably linked to your salary. Another account may not, but they may have debits hitting those accounts, and we all face that, right? And suddenly you get a failed transaction. Now, a bank knows, most businesses of this nature would know that the transaction is going to fail because we can see the pattern, right? You have a debit coming in and there's not enough money. So we can actually alert you to say that, well, a debit's going to come in tomorrow based on regular patterns and it's going to fail. So click here to fund the account and maybe even transfer a regular amount over so that it doesn't happen again. So it's a very simple use of data, and we eventually made the decision because we were generating so much data ourselves. Whereas when you look at merchant data, you have to acquire that data. You have to make deals with merchants.
You'd be dependent on a third party.
That's not impossible to do, but we felt that transactional data was so much more of a low-hanging fruit, right, and would add so much more to creating a bank that was really easy to use.
And could anticipate needs.
And could anticipate, exactly. So you have different tiers, right? At the base is really basic banking that is so easy to use. Banking should have always been this way. And one tier up is that if a problem does happen,
right,
how do I fix it quick so you don't have to repeat anything? And finally, the kind of the holy grail, right, is really where you use data to prevent problems from happening.
All right, you mentioned the statistics, and it seems quite alarming, the number of businesses that fail in their digital transformation efforts. Now, who should be responsible when those failures occur?
Well, for me, it would definitely rest on the top management, because it is the top management that is in a position to look at things very holistically. And what we have found is that is what is missing today, a holistic approach. And we are not talking about simple digital transformations, like the example I gave, right? Just converting paper forms to digital. We are talking about really organizational change, being more competitive, serving customers better. And that really requires the top management to take into account the many different elements and dimensions in a large company, right? So what segments do you want to serve? What gaps are there? What new insights have you discovered? What experience do you want to bring, right? And very importantly, what is the process? Process is a step that I think most companies miss out. Because without the process, what are you automating? You're really automating the process. Now, that's a whole chunk of work, and that's really focused around the customer. But you can focus something around the customer and not make any money. And most commercial companies are for profit. And so you've then got to think about the business model. And the business model we've found really encompasses 4 key things, which are quite commonplace. Differentiation, are you differentiated from the competition? Path to profit, can you make money at a time frame commensurate with your risk-taking ability? Scaling, right? Can you scale this to a total profit that you've budgeted for? And finally, what's the core competence gap? In order to bring this about, right? Is the gap too big? And therefore you have to stage it. Now, the most executives would have heard of these 4 points. The interesting thing they may not be aware of is that these 4 are what I call connected dials. As you turn one dial, say differentiation, path to profit moves, right? As you turn scaling, your core competence gap may shift. If you turn it down, your differentiation, right? If you turn core competence gap down, for example, your differentiation may reduce. So there's no way to turn everything to the right. As you turn one, the others turn. So it's a process of trade-off and fine-tuning that can be quite bewildering for most executives. And then you've got to make sure that these two snap together like jigsaw puzzles, right? The very strong CVP that customers are willing to pay for their problem to resolve, as well as a superior business model can snap together. And then you have the right starting point to start thinking about what are some of the capabilities we need to build this proposition and this business model.